and welcome to Dip In and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I'm very lucky this afternoon to be sitting down with the wonderful Duncan Craig, OBE, may I add. And Duncan is founder and chief exec of We Are Survivors, but not only that, and as many of my guests usually are, they have many hats that they wear, especially in this area of work. So I will hand over to Duncan to explain a bit more, but good afternoon, Duncan.
Afternoon, Lucy. Thank you for letting me dip in.
No one else has said that yet. I like that. That's brilliant. Thank you. No, you're very welcome.
So yeah, I'm Duncan Craig. I'm the founder and chief executive of We Are Survivors. We Are Survivors is a charity based in Greater Manchester. And we work across the Northwest and the UK, supporting boys and men who have been affected by sexual harms. So let me just pull that apart a little bit. We used to say we're an organisation that support boys and men who have experienced sexual abuse, rape, and sexual exploitation. And as you know, in our world, in the world that we VAWG, violence against women and girls, because that's the umbrella that we're talking about. Actions, people's behaviours, the law, things are changing a lot. And a few years ago, one of the lads who uses our service was just kind of like waxing lyrical, for want of a better phrase, and said, "Oh, I've often thought some of the stuff that happened to me wouldn't be supported by here." And I was like, "Why?" And they said, "Well, because I don't class it as sexual abuse, rape, or sexual exploitation." And it started this kind of cog turning in my mind. And then when you begin to think about some of the newer crimes, what I mean by that is how we're now legislating and how we're now investigating. So things like coercion control, some of the online harms.
Yeah.
I kind of began to start thinking, I think he's got a point. When we say sexual abuse, rape, and sexual exploitation, we mean everything.
Yes.
But how does anybody else know that? And so after a long conversation and talking to the board, staff members, the people who use our services, we've changed, and now we say sexual harms.
Yeah.
And I take time now to explain this to everybody, because the moment I go, oh yeah, it really makes sense. When we're working in an area where there has been so much misdirection, where from a perpetrator to a victim, where victims and survivors, we've often felt like we didn't really know what was going on. We were told one thing and yet another thing was happening. Clarity feels key. And so for me, starting off by saying we're an organisation that support boys and men affected by sexual harms feels like it's the most clear I am being, and I think it's the most clear we have ever been as an organisation.
I love that. Well, that's exactly it, isn't it? And I think sometimes because people do struggle, victims and survivors struggle to work out themselves what's happened. If
Yeah,
they feel it's pigeonholed into certain terminology or certain language, then they
yeah,
just say, well, that's not me.
yeah,
Whereas actually, well, it more likely than not is. But
yeah.
we have, that's why language is so, you have to be so careful, don't you?
Yeah, very much so. And I think, so the organization was founded, I founded the organization just over, 17 years ago now. We've just celebrated our 16th birthday a couple of months ago. And
Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. My boy's 16 now. And over the years, so I founded it because as a survivor myself, I needed support about the sexual abuse experience I'd had when I was younger, but also the experiences that I'd had of sexual violence in a relationship, in my late teens, early 20s, and I think like when I began to look for support, I knew there was support, but I couldn't find it. And so that's where what was originally Survivors Manchester and is now We Are Survivors. That's where we originally formed. And when I think back now and I think more about like how we're beginning to talk about sexual violence, sexual harms in a domestic abuse setting, coercion control, and in a domestic abuse framing
Yeah.
of people's experiences. If somebody's in, I'm just getting caught up in my wire then, if somebody's in a domestic abuse or domestically abusive relationship, um, there's a question, and I'm not saying that this is the case for everybody, but I'm always really interested in trying to dig underneath some of that stuff to try and make sure that we're talking about talking about what we really should be talking about. And there's a question for me of like, is sex that happens in that type of relationship ever fully consensual? Because
Oh
if
God,
there
yeah.
is a power dynamic, and so I think about some of the relationships, one in particular that like my first kind of proper big relationship. And, nowadays I think, God, no, none of that sex was ever fully consensual. And so, yeah, so we arrive now where when we're talking about sexual harms and we're talking about, I'm still all these years later, still kind of re contextualizing some of my
Yeah.
experiences, and I'm fine with that, and I really enjoy kind of like I suppose re-narrating the story to be more true now
Yes.
than it ever
Yes.
was before, and I actually found that really empowering. But there's something for me about when you say like language is really important, there's something for me about ensuring that not only is the organization's language proper, correct,
Yeah.
but my language is as well, not just for other people, but for me.
For you. Yeah.
Like, yeah, making sure that that when I'm saying something, that I'm being the most respectful, compassionate, kind,
Mm.
thoughtful about me and the past me's to ensure that
Yes.
I'm not minimizing stuff. Because I think that if I can do that for myself, I can do that for other people as
Other
well.
people. I mean, God, I'm like that. Yeah, there's a lot there, and I love that. And what I love about it is because I've met you as well, and even only briefly, I can see that you like to dig deeper and
Yeah,
find out what's going on. And that's exactly what we should be doing, especially with a topic like this. And I also think you're right when we're talking about, a lot of people think that, well, that relationship was abusive. But actually, when you start to look back, well, actually, the relationship before that, I
yeah,
thought they were protected, but actually, it was possession. It wasn't protection, it was possession.
yeah.
And so you start going back and you start unpicking, and it is difficult. And I've said this very often, it's not easy sometimes to look back, but
Sure.
it's so beneficial
Yeah,
to then see actually it wasn't just that one relationship, because in your head, very often people think it's like, well, how did this all start? Was it my childhood?
yeah.
I thought I had a great childhood. And you start trying to put not blame, but you try and start to pinpoint where it all began.
Sure, sure.
And you're right. I think looking back at all those different relationships, you can start to see, and especially when we're very young and naive
Yeah,
a lot of the time,
yeah,
and I think very often victims and survivors are their authentic self. A
yeah.
perpetrator is never their authentic self. There's always
Sure,
that mask.
sure.
And I think so, you're right, looking back on those relationships and unpicking that and saying, okay, so it wasn't just that one, but it was that, or it was this, and there
Yeah,
was little bits. And that's when you start to put it together. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? You
yeah.
put all those pieces together.
And I also think as well, like there's something. So I always say I had a brilliant childhood. I really did. I had a really caring family. Um, I had my best friend in the whole wide world was my granddad,
Yeah.
and he is like
Same for me. That's so funny.
absolutely my hero.
Yeah.
He really is, and I lost him in 1999, and even still, I still think about him every single day. I'm not a religious person at all. I'm not spiritual. I don't necessarily kind of lean into anything in inverted commas supernatural
Yeah.
above
Yeah.
nature. I think I always kind of go, I'm a scientist. And what I mean by that is, I think the survivor, I always have to know fact.
Yeah.
And I always
Yeah.
have to see something because it's about trust
Yeah. Of course it is.
I'm very, don't get me wrong, I am very open to a good scientist should be to having my theories disproven.
Yeah.
That's what we're
Yeah.
supposed to do in science. So I'm not
Yeah.
like blocking things, but I do sometimes think, as much as I had this wonderful childhood, I also had this other stuff. It's like two separate lives kind of going on. I do think that a lot of my early relationships were were really unhealthy, really unhealthy. In part, definitely not 100% blaming on, but definitely in part because of the sexual abuse experiences that I had
Yeah.
from around about 11-ish to about 16, 17. Because in some way, nothing to do with him, the person that abused me, nothing
Yeah.
to do with him, and everything to do with something about trust of my own body.
Yeah.
So believing in some way that this man was able to kind of take something of me at any point meant that the value that I had within myself and my body and my mind, etc., wasn't as it wasn't as rich. The value wasn't as high up as it should have been. And
Yeah.
so other relationships then in my early life, in my early adult life, as a teenager,
Yeah.
I look back now and I think, God, yeah, that was really unhealthy. Now, I struggle with this sometimes because what I think what people hear is something quite binary.
Mm.
So, because I'm saying that was not a healthy relationship, that in some way, then that means I was the victim of domestic abuse, and there was elements of that. There was
Yeah.
elements of that. One or two of my relationships were quite violent as well, and I was nearly always a subject of it. Um, but lots of the relationships weren't healthy, like psychologically unhealthy, psychologically unsafe, and I would argue, um, for my partners at the time, they would probably say the same thing. I'm not too sure I was the healthiest person to be with.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
yeah. Yeah.
as much as we always want to have in every single story the goodie and the baddie, as much as we want that, for my opinion, is life is far more messier than that,
Definitely.
and that's not by any stretch of imagination to take away from um, the abuse that perpetrators put on
Yeah.
survivors. But it is so much more messier than this binary good and bad. And
You're
I
so right.
wish
Yeah.
we'd get
Mm.
out of this because I think that's the one thing that stops us having proper conversations. I really do. And stops us healing.
Yeah, and within that, you made me think of a friend of mine years and years ago now said to me, some people bring out the best in you and some bring out the worst. And it stuck with me, and that must be about 10, 12 years ago now. And it's always stuck with me. And I thought, what an interesting thing to say. And she was talking about a relationship she'd been in many, many years ago. And it was just so interesting because to look at her now, you think, healthy marriage, healthy relationship, kids, etc., etc. But actually, that person she was with at the time brought out sides of her that she never thought. That
Yeah,
frustration that you're
yeah,
not listening to me. I don't get an opinion. I don't. And you're right, like you say, it's that if we always look at it as the good and the bad, the black and the white, and unfortunately, abuse across the board, there's so much grey area in between as well.
completely.
And I think, that's where, like you say, that's where we can't have, unfortunately, at the moment, we can't seem to have these honest conversations because it has to be, well, it's this or it's that.
Yeah,
And like you say, it is that if I heard somebody say, oh God, I'm always going on social media, doom scrolling when I should be sleeping at night. And obviously the kind of things that I'm watching are things that obviously relate to abuse. And somebody talking about that kind of reactive abuse. So when somebody knows how, a perpetrator knows how to push someone's buttons, knows how to get that reaction, and then that person reacts.
Sure.
You know, if somebody then as a professional goes into that situation, how do they differentiate then? If somebody has reacted to a situation, and this is where I think, like you said, that's where that grey area is, and I don't know what the answer is to that.
Yeah. I do think there's something about, like, so part of my work is working with, so part of our organisation's work, I should start with, is, so we see about 2,500 men every single year. We work across, as I say, Greater Manchester and the Northwest, but part of our work is in prisons. So across all 15 prisons across the Northwest, we work with predominantly men, because we've got 14 male prisons and one female prison. We work in all of them. And those men, on the whole, are in prison for violence, sometimes domestic abuse, serious organised crime, drugs and alcohol issues, theft, and also sometimes sexual offences. And we don't get to decide who we do and don't work with. We literally kind of, if you're in prison, that's the criteria. If you're on that wing, etc., etc. And so the organisation for the past 10 years has worked with people who've committed horrific violence, loss of life, murder, manslaughter. And as a psychotherapist and as a survivor, I really struggled with that to begin with, because I needed there to be a bad person and a good person, a right person and a wrong person. I needed that binary. I think partly for my own well-being, for my own sense of self and sanity.
How to make sense of it all, isn't it?
Yeah, massively. And then working with men who are in prison who have committed, like I say, some of the most hideous crimes. And this isn't about excusing people. I remember my therapist, one of my therapists, saying to me, effectively, calling out some of my shitty behaviour, the way I would treat people, the way I would just kind of cut people out. And that obviously leaves some people feeling really shit about our relationship. That there was, in some level, my therapist saying, just because you've been abused, Duncan, it doesn't give you the right to treat other people like shit. And I was a bit like, what do you mean?
I thought that's exactly what it gave me.
I thought I'd been given a free pass, like literally, and then having to walk away and go, ooh, that is a really big piece of humble pie to swallow. And then beginning to see some of these men, and again, I am absolutely will never make any excuses for the behaviour of the men that are in prison that we work with. Absolutely, never make any excuses for. But there's something about reasons, and reasons are not excuses. Reasons help us understand. Oh, sorry, let me just shut the window because I can just hear like this man with a Hoover thing. 1 second.
I love it. Man with a Hoover. We get to see all your posters there.
Of course, as we're recording this, somebody outside will have one of those glass blower things.
I used to have the window. I tend to get the window cleaners next door, so I just end up having to close all the windows.
I forgot that was open, actually. Apologies for that. So like for me, when I began to hear some of these people's stories and then understand the crimes that they'd committed, I'm not saying I fully understood, but what I am saying is so often I could go, Oh, right. I I can see how
Yeah,
something started there,
yeah,
and then it went there, and then it went there, and then you ended up here. Like,
yeah,
I can see the trajectory. And I'll be honest with you, that was such a big thing for me to then start thinking more about early intervention,
yeah,
because I used to be a bit not poo-pooing it, but you'd hear this phrase early intervention like consistently, and I used to think, oh, for God's sake, can we talk about something else?
yeah.
And actually, the reality is, when I working with these prisoners, was like, God, yeah, if only somebody had intervened at this point, then it wouldn't have got to that
At
point
that
or the
point,
next
yeah,
point, and
yeah,
maybe that person would still have ended up doing the things they're doing,
yeah.
etc., etc. But maybe they wouldn't. That's
Mm.
the important bit for me. Maybe they wouldn't.
Exactly. And it's funny because for so long I've always said abusers, choose to abuse. And somebody asks, is it alcohol? Is it drugs? Is this, is that? And you'll say, well, they exacerbate any situation, but they're not the cause of something. There is something else that's the root cause of why somebody behaves the way they do. And like you say, it could be that that person seems to have had a great childhood, or you just at whatever point in time something changes.
Completely.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's difficult because I know I've seen individuals in group facilitation who have talked about enablers from, say, parents with perpetrators of some terrible crimes, like you say, and if you're growing up with that as
Yeah.
an example, saying, well, that's not bad, what you did was good, and then that, like you say, it's that point where those things build,
Yeah.
but it isn't always necessarily that, and I think this is why society finds it so hard to discuss this subject, is because it's not just that it's taboo, the words domestic abuse or sexual abuse or whatever it is. It's because they can't imagine all these levels and all the
Yeah.
complexities. Because if it was as straightforward as just saying, here you go, here's a training manual and we'll explain everything, here's a
Yeah.
policy and it'll sort everything out. It won't, because then there will always be, oh, but then there's this add-on and then there's that add-on. And then you've also got to think about this. And it would go on forever. And I think that's why it's so difficult,
Yeah.
because it is so complex and it
Yeah.
is so layered. I think that's the I used that word recently. I did an episode with a lady called Dr. Aisha Ahmed, and we were talking about the cultural considerations for Bangladeshi
Mm.
women as an
Mm.
example. And she's worked with lots of women. And what she was saying was, again, it's the layering of these problems. It's all those additional things. So if somebody has a disability, there's an additional layer.
Yeah.
If somebody's older and has been
Yeah.
in that relationship a long time, there's another layer. And that's where I think society just kind of goes, yeah, that doesn't happen in
Yeah.
either this workplace or in my family or wherever, because
Yeah.
it's too much.
And kind of like what we often want as human beings is simple.
Yeah,
We want a simple understanding, a
yeah,
simple explanation. We want to kind of go, like, I go back to that binary thing. Because of this, then this.
yeah.
And you're like,
So much.
sometimes I get a little bit tired. I really do. A little bit tired of um the virtuous,
Mm,
like, who often talk about survivors always being like the good ones and the perpetrators always being the bad ones. And yes, of course, the behavior
yes,
is a bad thing, of
yeah,
course.
yeah,
But I struggle with this idea that there is this, and I say this as a survivor, that
yeah,
that survivors are just these genuinely lovely people who have never done anything wrong in their life. I
yeah,
go, wow,
yeah,
wow, okay,
yeah.
don't count me in that one then.
Well, and I think again, that's why it is so hard, because and I think that's why family and friends really struggle. It's such a good point you made, because I try and talk, when I do talk to organisations, I try and say it's not just about your staff as, say, a member of staff, or you yourselves as the employees. We're talking now about friends and family. How do they try and support somebody? And I think you hit the nail on the head. Then it's so difficult, because if somebody in your family looks at you and goes, but you seem like this lovely person and perfect person, everything's fine and dandy. So
Yeah,
how could you be either a
yeah,
perpetrator, or how could you be a victim of abuse? You always, and it's that, it's that projection, I think, that we put on
Yeah,
perpetrators and victims to say, but I expected you to be this way. And then we wonder why people don't speak out. We wonder why. And I,
completely.
and I think I was talking to you about this when we met recently about, statistics are one of those things that drive me up the wall because, and again, I rarely touch up. If somebody asks me to, that's fine. I'll look
Sure,
up the latest stats and you can have them. That's no problem.
sure.
But I think when you've worked in this area and you know that the statistics aren't marrying up with the true reflection of what's going on in
Yeah,
society,
yeah, yeah.
then that for me is, and I know we need them. We have to have that
Of course,
point to
of
look at.
course,
I get that.
of
But for
course.
but for me, I do find it very difficult
Yeah,
when I'm talking to people and I'll say, but how do you know you're not in an abusive relationship? And
yeah,
I've known people who do the head tilt of, well, that would never happen to me. And
yeah,
you're like,
yeah,
but how do you
yeah.
know it's not happening to you now? You
I mean,
don't, do you?
literally, yeah,
Yeah.
literally 1 hour ago to us speaking, a MP got a 10-minute rule motion in the House of Commons. So just straight after Prime Minister's question time, Ben Obese-Ejector, who is the MP for Huntingdon, I think it is,
Okay.
he had a 10-minute rule. So that is effectively a motion that he presents to the House on a particular subject to say
Yeah.
we want this bill, and as long as it goes kind of undebated.
Okay.
So as soon as if everyone goes, yeah, oh, that sounds all right, then it goes into a second reading and they
Right.
begin to start pulling things together. And his motion was interpersonal violence strategy against men and boys.
Mm.
Um, so in his reading, he stands up in the House and he's talking about you know, 1 in 4 this and 1 in 7 that. And you're
Mm.
right, like the statistics go, okay, they're kind of numbers. But I
Yeah.
think just watching and seeing other people sat around him, I think sometimes some of those numbers,
Mm.
1 in 6 males will experience sexual harms at some point in their life. We know that 1 in 10 rapes will be of males. We know that only a third of male survivors, have ever made a disclosure.
Yeah.
We know that 85 men die by suicide every single week. Like sometimes those numbers, those stats make you go, oh
Yeah.
gosh,
Yeah.
like I didn't
Yeah.
realize. And
It
that
was.
then becomes the start of a bigger conversation. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
for me, that's where data really kind of and the stats really become important because
Yeah.
we can only know what we know. We can't know what we don't know. We get most of our data from things like Office of National Statistics, from Crime Survey. Well, if you're from a population, a community, a certain gender, so males, for instance, we know that they disproportionately will not report.
Mm.
So if we're only looking at data from police reporting, then how do we ever know what's really going on? And
Yeah.
so we do have to treat numbers with some sense.
Yes. That's the word I would
Yeah,
use.
it
Yeah.
has to be
Yeah.
in context without a
Yeah.
shadow of a doubt.
No, I agree. I agree. And I think if ever I do talk stats, I will always say, the kind of caveat to that is that they're never a true reflection, just so that people understand that there are many, many people who will not
Completely.
or have disclosed and got so far down that system or that journey and gone, actually, I can't do this anymore. So it's I think that's one of and again, it goes back to this complexity for society to understand because we're a data sort of generation, aren't we? We are all about the data. We are all about analysing and evidence and everything else. And unfortunately, for a lot of people who are in those relationships, because when you're in that relationship, to you, that's your norm. That's your normal. So,
Yeah, yeah.
how do you then, when you are out of that relationship, and for a lot of the time, I think, and I did an episode with Richard Port, who's an MD, and we talked about the family court. And one of the things we talked about there is for somebody who then experiences the family court, for example, around post-separation abuse, it's
Mm.
only when they're on that journey that they start to go, hang on a minute, so this is not normal. You're telling me this behavior, but they've always
Yeah, yeah,
behaved
yeah.
like that. They've
Yeah,
always been controlling. This is what I'm used to. And
Yeah.
I think that's where, it is so difficult. And that's why the stats are obviously part one of the reasons they're affected and impacted. But you're right, there is 100% we need to hear those numbers to go, oh my God, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't understand that that's how bad things have got. But
Yeah.
it's how this, and again, it's how we get things across, isn't it, without scaring people. I think one of the things that when I started out with this podcast was to say there's no intimidation, it's just conversation.
Yeah.
Because if somebody listens to this and thinks, oh my God, that's me, and I get what they're talking about, and I
Yeah.
100% don't feel like I'm being judged, or, and I actually feel validated by it, then that's precisely what I set out to achieve, is get rid of that intimidation of that conversation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then hopefully people will find that support and know that organizations like yours
Yeah.
are out there.
I mean, I agree with you in the main, but I also sometimes worry because this happens a lot,
Yeah.
where people begin to kind of talk about like, oh, it's a really difficult subject, and in some way,
Yeah. And bless
gosh,
you.
excuse me, if I'm not sneezing, I'm having to stop to go and close the window. It's all business.
All going
Um,
on. It's all going on.
yeah. Something about it. These are difficult subjects, and these are scary subjects. And yes, of course, we give people trigger warnings and all that kind of stuff, and we don't want to, we don't want to scare people.
Yeah.
But there's an element of maybe we've spent so much time trying to de-scare. That's not even a word, but
No, I know what you
we
mean. Yeah.
try to take the fear out
Like
of
that
it. That
de-escalating the fear, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that in some way maybe we've stopped talking about what the actual truth is.
Yeah.
This is a really, really difficult subject
Yeah.
to engage with. It's a difficult subject to understand. It's sad, it's traumatic, it's all those things, but also it's also really exciting. It's full of inspirational people who have, in some way, they've overcome adversity. Like nobody ever talks about that. About whilst it's a terrifying, horrible, yucky subject to have and to deal with, it's also full of people who are telling those yucky, horrible, frightening
Yeah.
stories,
Yeah.
who like just completely inspire you on a
Yeah.
daily basis.
You're right. And that for me, and sometimes I think I maybe am perceived as being a bit naive when I started out with this, because I thought, no, there needs to be somewhere where anybody, doesn't matter if you're a victim, survivor, it doesn't matter who you are, professionals, that people might have waited months to be able to get hold to speak to somebody. And
Yeah,
actually they can
yeah,
listen to an episode and go, that's really good advice. That's what I need to focus on, whether it's a therapist, whoever it is. And that's what I love about this is I've opened it up to so many different areas of abuse. And one of the things I always try and do, and anytime I'm on LinkedIn or anytime I do it, I always try and hashtag hope. And sometimes I think people can think, oh, she's airy fairy. But genuinely for me, especially in this conversation, is if you don't have hope, what
yes.
have you got?
You're
And you've got,
hopeless.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah. And there has
absolutely.
to be that certain amount, even if it's just the hope of saying, I got up today. That was
Completely.
enough. I got
Completely.
out of bed, I put some clothes on.
Yeah.
That's the hope that I got
Yeah.
through that. And
It's
I think
about
that,
change, isn't
yeah,
it? It's about the
yeah,
fact that there is the possibility for change, and that's
yeah.
full of hope.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is why I've really wanted to do this and make it, and hopefully over time it'll just keep growing and there'll be more. And I was shocked because when I started out, I thought, am I going to get anybody? You messaging people, go, would you like to come on and talk about domestic abuse, or would you like to come on and talk about sexual abuse, and would you like to, stalking and harassment? And the amount of people go, yeah, 100%, because everyone's so passionate about what they're
Yeah,
doing. And for me, like you said earlier on, when you said you knew there was support out there, you just didn't know where to look.
yeah,
And that's why I think that these sort of, we have podcasts on everything. If we have things like this out there, then you know that there's hope and you know that there's support. And okay, somebody might think, didn't know that was there. And okay, right now I do. And now, or family and friends, like I said. So it's just that trying to think of different ways of getting that message out there that you are deaf. And again, it all sounds really cliche and cheesy, but for me, it's true, is you're not on your own. You might
Yeah,
feel like you're alone, and you are in your experience, and no one's taking that away from the individual. But you're not on your own. There's so many other people out there that can give you that validation of actually what I experienced wasn't right and
yeah.
wasn't fair and was, yeah.
Yeah, human beings are essentially we're pack animals.
Mm,
Freud um came up with this idea originally after studying and as a godfather of modern day psychology.
yeah.
And people have verified that for years and years and years. We don't do well on individually. Even if I mean, for God's sake, like even just the thought of like procreation, like
Yeah.
how do you continue the gene line?
Mm,
Even just that standard has to be
yeah.
about something about togetherness.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
from a really animalistic kind of point of view. And so when we isolate, we don't do very well and we don't thrive very well. And feeling like this it only happened to me, despite the fact you can switch the news on and see that it's happening to many people, there is still something for me about trying to get people thinking less about it is only me, and more, well, it's only me that's experienced this, but I
This.
know there's a community who have experienced similar, and
Yes.
similar is pack.
Yeah.
And
It
there's
is. It
something
is.
about belonging. There's
Yeah.
something about having a
Yeah.
real sense of belonging. When I first broke my silence, like 18, 19 years ago now, there really felt like there was no support for me because I was male. And even though, unlike now, so sexual violence, domestic violence and abuse, so-called honor-based killing, forced marriage, they're all crimes that we frame under tackling violence against women and girls. So the strategy that the government has and has had for the past 15 years has always framed those crimes as about disproportionately affecting women and girls. Now, that's absolutely true. We know that. And even, to be honest with you, even the kind of, we can only know what we know, we can't know what we
Yeah.
don't know. I think that if we had a truth pill for every single person, I think we would still see that those are crimes that disproportionately affect women and girls. So I have never had any problem with that whatsoever. The problem that I have always had is that men and boys are lumped into that. So even though on the front page it says tackling violence against women and girls, when you go inside the documents and strategies, it it has all these graphs that show this is what happens here and this is what we've done there. And even though it doesn't necessarily tell you this, the data always as pertains to men and boys too.
Yeah.
And that's often a surprise for people because it doesn't talk about men and boys in the strategy, but
Mm,
but our data and our numbers are included in that.
yeah.
And all through the years, I've often thought something about visibility.
Mm,
And again, acts and sharing. And even though that wasn't the tackling violence against women and girls wasn't necessarily around when I first broke my silence, there
yeah.
definitely was something. There definitely was things that I'd seen in the news about. To be honest with you, it was usually like church, like clerical
Yeah.
abuse,
Yeah.
or there'd be some kind of
Maybe teachers, or it was always those sort of stories.
yes,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
some kind of like prison rape, kind of big sort of
Mm,
sensationalized, like in from film and stuff. And so for me, um, who was going through these experiences by this man that never felt violent
mm,
in the traditional sense, and in fact felt in some way compassionate,
mm.
made me understand this wasn't abuse. And so why would I talk about something
Because it didn't feel violent.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
a bit like it didn't feel abusive, and I had no compare contrast. I had no
Yeah.
storyline in a
Yeah.
TV program where it was about a boy being abused. I could have gone, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
And so that, it feels really important to be able to put those stories out there to kind of get that visibility. But the moment that I did kind of start putting two and two together and pulling all of these different bits of information and kind of going, something doesn't seem right here. That
Mm.
was the bit where, even though I thought nobody's going to have experienced what I've experienced, I still wanted to be part of a community
Yeah.
because a friend of mine who is a psychotherapist, also wrote what is essentially seen as like the core text across the world for male survivors. A guy called Mike Lew, who wrote a book called Victims No Longer, which really is, the classic text
Yeah.
for male survivor work. Mike said, abuse happens in isolation, healing happens together. And it's
Yeah.
always stuck with me, that
So, yeah.
togetherness, the kind of the belonging, the
Yeah.
idea that I don't care whether you're old or young, whether you're black or white, gay or straight, tall or short, fat or thin, and everything
It,
in between.
yeah.
If you're a male survivor, then you're my people.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
want to belong. I want to kind of connect. And that feels really, really, really important. Really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Because if you take kind of like for female survivors, there was a whole movement created
Mm.
by, at some point, started with a couple of women coming together to say enough is enough.
Enough. Yeah. Yeah.
And that,
Mm.
and now what we've got is we've got a massive kind of domestic abuse, sexual violence kind of movements across the world. And,
Yeah.
we saw it
Absolutely.
recently with, in the last few years, with like Me Too and Time's Up and all of those kind of
Yeah.
things. But yet there is still something, we're still lagging behind as male survivors. And so for me, always reminding people that togetherness is the key,
Yeah.
that being part of a community is where you find healing, is a
Yeah.
tick.
Yeah, it is. It is. And this is, what I love about that is when I started a podcast as well, my vision was I want everybody, like I was saying before, everybody to have that voice, everybody to have that opportunity to say what they want to say and not just as victims and survivors, but and a lot of the time, DA professionals have some either personal experience or understanding through family and
Absolutely.
friends, whatever it is. So they understand that on that cellular level of what it is to
Yeah,
experience abuse. And I think it's just, to me, you're right. It is that togetherness with it all, and I am proud that it means that I can say, yeah, but it is inclusive. If we use that word a lot,
yeah,
but
yeah,
that's what it is. And so hopefully that sets the example, if you like, that yeah, we
yeah,
can do this together. We can
yeah,
all have that conversation and be respectful of everybody's opinions. Because one thing I noticed a lot when, say, within group facilitation, when I did used to actually run group facilitation on occasions, was within the women that would be in that group, the demographics there, even just in that little room, the
yeah,
demographics, the age range,
yeah,
everybody was, but the thread was there.
yeah,
And even though everybody's experiences were unique to them, and absolutely they have every right to be protective of those experiences of their own, but actually there was a thread that ran through where you could
yeah,
see heads would nod and go, oh yeah, oh right, okay, right. And
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah,
it's like those
yeah,
light bulb moments of going, oh, and that is
sure.
how we want to see it on a bigger scale, isn't it? Like you say,
Yeah,
of going, there is that thread and it runs throughout. I mean, I tend to use the term domestic abuse more than I use domestic violence. I always feel that if I say domestic violence when I'm talking to an organization, is I'm already putting it in their heads that it's somebody being held up against a
yeah,
wall, or
yeah,
it's
yeah,
some. So if
yeah,
and I will always say, I talk about domestic abuse because to me that's where we talk about all the forms of abuse,
yeah,
from the financial to psychological to sexual
yeah, yeah.
to physical, all of it. And I do think sometimes, when we have like domestic violence awareness month, I'm kind of like, can we not call it domestic abuse
Well,
awareness
we've
month?
got, haven't we? It's a Domestic Abuse Act, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm kind of like,
And the
why do
Domestic
we?
Abuse Commissioner.
Yeah. So can we? I don't know. That's
Yeah.
just so. What are you doing? Nothing else? If you could just sort that
I
out.
know. I mean, that is that kind of that part of that evolution of language, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
really kind of getting to understand what are we talking about when we talk about these things. And
yeah,
again, go back to that thing of maybe sometimes because we in some way because we kind of want to try and protect people from the pain and the uncomfortableness of this subject. We wrap ourselves up and then we don't know what to kind of say. And
Yeah.
there is, I don't know, there's something for me about the next few years feels like there's going to be a real shift in sands when it comes down to our worlds,
Mm.
domestic abuse, sexual harms, because of how we're better understanding behavior and the harms that people experience in interpersonal settings. And I mean, I really welcome it, but I don't know. I do think there's a bit more pain before we come out the other
Before,
side. I
yeah,
really do. I really
yeah,
do. Even just recently, I've been as well as my work as the chief exec here, I kind of wear a few other hats. So I do a lot of stuff with the government around the Vogue strategy. So I'm on a number of different working groups and boards and panels. And I've been part of the core group for the new Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, which is being led by Minister Phillips
yeah.
from the Home Office and Minister Davis Jones in the Ministry of Justice. And even kind of sat round those tables at the various different Westminster meetings, Home Office and Ministry of Justice, it feels there where it feels in those rooms that there is the beginnings of some new conversations, or
Mm.
rather more advanced
Right.
conversations.
Yeah.
Not necessarily new, because the
Yeah.
conversations are the same, but um, people are having more diverse, wider conversations. So recently, I was at a meeting and the chief executive of Hourglass was
Yeah.
talking,
Yeah.
and I'd not necessarily heard of Hourglass, and Hourglass is what used to be Action on Elder Abuse,
Yeah. For older people. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'd never thought of when Action from Elder Abuse was around. I never thought of sexual harms, domestic abuse. I think I just thought about it as violence. And when
Mm.
he was talking, and he was talking about financial abuse that older people will often experience, and abuse in care homes, and sexual violence and sexual harms, and I was like, whoa, like
Mm.
that doesn't feel like a new conversation. That feels like an advanced
Yes.
conversation.
Yeah.
And if we're going to be doing more of this, having
Yeah.
more advanced conversations, more encompassing conversations, it feels like our language is going to spend time over the next couple of years evolving, which
Evolving.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm absolutely all for. I'm absolutely all
Yeah.
for.
No,
But there is
I
pain
agree.
with that. There is absolute pain with that.
There is. There is. There is. You're right.
I'm falling out. And as my grandma used to say, there'll be tears before bedtime.
Now, don't, yeah, everybody getting too giddy. There'll be tears before bedtime.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, yeah, yes. Well, I've experienced that myself as a child,
yeah,
But you're right. It is, and there will be tears before bedtime. And you're right. There is going to be. It's difficult because everybody comes at things from such different angles. And I think if somebody is very passionate, say, for example, about older abuse, and
yeah,
that's their focus. And I think because for me, and again, maybe sometimes I do look at things in a bit of a utopian state, unfortunately, is I would love to think that we could all see everybody's perspective. So for
yeah,
me, I've always been very passionate about post-separation abuse because it's a subject
yeah,
that most people don't talk about.
yeah, yeah.
Because that
I'd
that
argue some people, sorry to cut you off
yeah,
there, it's not, I would argue it's not that people don't talk about. I don't think people recognize, because
no,
honestly, it wasn't until we sat down and we were chatting that it kind of, even in my own mind, I was like, have I ever have I ever been in a space where someone's talking about this, or has it been part of my vocabulary? And honestly, it hadn't.
no, and it's and this is for me again when you talk about that kind of advancing those conversations, and it feels sometimes like I'm pushing against the tide, and I know there's not just me, there's lots of people out there talking about post-separation abuse, but I always come back at the very start to the conversation around. So if I am talking to organisations, is to say the classic, well, why didn't you just leave? And then I give a very, very long list of all the
Yeah.
reasons why somebody isn't able to leave,
Yeah.
because for me, domestic abuse and post-separation abuse, obviously they're linked. So we have to go back to talking about domestic abuse to begin with, for people to then try to understand post-separation abuse. Well, you've left
Yeah.
now. So we go
Yeah.
from the why didn't you just leave to the, well, you've left, so everything should be okay. Actually, that's when things get a lot worse. That's
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
it escalates. That's when the power and control is slipping away,
Sure.
and etc. So and it is a difficult one, because I think, again, like, a lot of people don't recognize it as being abuse, because, well, you're not living in the same house, so how can you be being abused? Well, you can, unfortunately, through technology, through the court system, through all sorts of
Yeah.
various systems, you can be abused post separation, with having children, etc. It's so vast. But again, it's bringing that into the conversation,
Mm,
and it's going to take time, like you say, and it is going to
mm.
be difficult. But hopefully, we slowly. Well, you've been doing it a lot longer than I have, put it that way. But and you can see how far things have come in the space of time. 20 years is a very long time, and like you say,
Yeah.
now things are
Eh,
changing.
definitely, definitely. I say this with an element of caution. So things, without a shadow of a doubt, things have definitely moved on.
Mm.
But, but there is a bit of me that worries we're beginning to roll back now. So
Yeah,
if we've gone up the hill, I
yeah,
don't know if we've stalled and now we're rolling back and no one's putting the foot on the brake.
yeah,
And I genuinely, that's my one big worry.
yeah.
Um, particularly around men and boys, the fact that, in 2019, I was part of a small group that developed the government's first ever male position statement. So it was a position statement on men and boys um, as victims of violence against women and girls, which just sort of genuinely, every time I say it, I've been saying it for like 15 years, and I just think, God, that doesn't even make any English sense.
And then we
Um,
expect people to try and understand it.
exactly, exactly. The fact that in 2019 we did that, then we did a refresh in 2022. Um, I was asked recently, what was the difference between 219 and 222? And I got no idea. I cannot tell you. To this day, I still don't, I'm not able to tell you, nor are our government officials, what impact did those two position statements have? No one knows. And the fact that we are still talking about men and boys as victims of violence against women and girls 15 years later, with seemingly no appetite to look at that and change that. I mean,
Where you feel it's stalled on, like, yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
also rolling back. We're not like,
Mm.
yeah, we don't seem to be talking about it. The biggest rape case in British legal history happened here in Manchester with Reynard Sanaga, who raped over 200 men in a really short period of time.
Yes. No.
And so over those 200 men are classed as male victims of violence against women and girls. That just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And who the hell, which female is fighting to have men in that
That's
strategy? Nobody.
no, no.
Nobody is. And so the bit for me that feels like we're going backwards is we got really good at having difficult conversations and kind of going, how has this happened? Why are we
Yeah.
doing that? That doesn't seem like it happens anymore.
It's interesting, especially when we seem to have progressed so much in talking about. I mean, even if you just I think of having conversations with my children now, and I'm thinking, my God, I'd never have had that conversation with my mother,
Mm.
not in a million years, or my dad, and it just wouldn't have happened. And
Yeah, yeah,
and that's just, I'm talking on a kind of family level, but as a society, we seem to be more open to having conversations about things, and we talk about things that would never have been spoken about years ago. But like you say, it seems that, to a certain extent, is there a limit as human beings that we want to go?
sure, sure.
It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
yeah. And whatever limit that is, we have to find a way past it because
Mhm.
we have absolutely um, only just begun to coin a phrase.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if you saw recently in the news, but about only a few months ago, it wasn't like a long time ago. Um, there was a man in, I think it was Bolton,
Mm.
in Greater Manchester, who was the first person to be, now let me get this right, um, charged and convicted of the distribution, distribution, and creation of indecent images of children
Mm.
when the image was 100% AI generated. And he was charged and convicted under the sexual offences legislation
Right.
rather than the old-fashioned kind of what's it? Obscene publications.
Right.
So obscene publications, really, really old law that was used, many times around pornography kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, and previously we have tackled things like that.
Mm.
Like, let's be clear, like I don't fully understand AI, so I could
Hey,
easily
I'm with you
step
there.
in the wrong thing here. But this wasn't like a image that was manipulated. This was a completely made up image. So let's just call it a computer drawing.
Yeah.
A drawing or a piece of art or something like that,
Mm.
obscene publications. But this, we have treated this as if the children in the image
Mm.
was a real person.
Person.
And
Right.
I think that is fascinating
Mm. It
because
is.
I
Yeah.
think it it holds up like a mirror to us as a society to say, are we are we classing the real life, for want of a better phrase, sexual abuse of a child and the filming of a child and the
Mm.
photographs, are we
Yeah.
classing that as being the same as this
Yes.
computer generated
Yes.
thing?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and if we are, why are we?
Why
And I'm
are
not
we?
saying we should or we shouldn't, but I'm
Yeah.
interested in kind of getting into that. And then
Yeah.
when we then think about coercion control and all of these other, in inverted commas, newer crimes, again,
Yeah.
I'm a bit like, yeah, we've really only dealt with some of the basics over the past 15 years.
Yeah.
Like we're now scratching the surface and getting underneath stuff around drug facilitated sexual violence and drug
Yeah.
facilitated sexual assault, chemsex, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Stuff that years ago we wouldn't have even thought was happening, but now
No.
we
No.
recognize it. And so there is something for me that feels really important about recognizing this is just the start of a story. This
Exactly.
is
And
just
it's
the
yes.
beginning. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. And that's it, like you said, as society evolves and as technology evolves and all
yeah,
those, like years ago, we would have said that stalking and harassment was an in-person thing, a crime, an in-person. Whereas now, stalking and harassment is on so many other levels, whether it's through social media, whether it's through
yeah,
trackers, whether it's through, say, for example, in post-separation abuse, the children have their own iPads or etc. Online gaming, perpetrators maybe manipulating their
yeah,
children
yeah,
through those sort of mediums.
yeah.
And it's how do we keep up with that? It's and understand it, like you say, if we're going to treat, like you say, the example of the AI, and yes, I could, the impact of that and what it suggests is horrific, obviously, but comparing that or lumping it in as the same as being an actual, yeah, it
Mm,
is fascinating.
mm,
It
mm,
is, it really is. Do you know
mm.
what? I think you and I could go on all day.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
And I know you're a busy man, so I probably should stop. But Duncan, I can't thank you enough. You've been an absolute legend, as we would say in Man. And
Oh,
it's
a
from a
pleasure.
Mancunian.
Yeah.
Lovely.
It's a pleasure. No, there's so many different things I could talk about with this, but I just think it's great that you're having these conversations for people to hear. And also the very fact that we're not necessarily, you're kind of saying, here's an umbrella, let's just kind of dip in and
Yeah,
talk about it. I think that feels
yeah.
so important. So thank you
Oh,
for inviting me.
oh, thank you so much. Well, I'm sure when I'm doing my 50 billionth season, we can do another one.
I'd love
But for
to.
me being all positive and proactive, it'll be going on.
I'd
It'll
love
keep
to.
going. Oh, thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Where